Now before you sharpen your blades, you're gonna wanna give it a quick visual inspection and check a few things just to make sure they're good candidates to be sharpened. One of those things is if you see any cracks through the metal, that's gonna be an obvious reason. Or if you can just look at the blade and see that it's visibly bent, that's gonna be another reason to replace rather than resharpen. The other two things is if you were cutting the grass and it kind of felt a little wobbly or shaky, that's generally because it's either the blade is out of balance, which I'm going to go over at the end of the video on how to balance your blades, or it could be because you have a bent blade. And a quick way to tell that, it's not a scientific test or anything, but is to just take your blade and lay it on a flat surface. And you can push on the blade edge part and just kind of see how much lift you get when you push down on that. And if it's lifting real high on one side or either way, then you know your blade is off and it's bent. And another thing that you want to look at, and this is really kind of going to be up to the person of how much time they want to put into their blade sharpening, is take a look at your edge here, and depending on how beat up or hammered or gouged it is, it may, depending on how much work you want to put into it, may be worth replacing as well. I mean, you can always grind enough away and recreate a new edge, but that's going to be up to you to decide. As far as the angle of your blade edge, I don't really get too technical on that. A lot of people will say 30 degrees is the optimal blade angle. Other people will go tighter or lower. Just keep in mind, the flatter you go, the more material you're removing. So it may be really sharp, but that is gonna dull pretty quick because you're gonna hit little things while cutting. And you may be taking so much material off that any little things you do hit actually dings it in or dents it in or chips it more than it otherwise would if you just did what I do, which is just do your best no matter what method you're using to follow the factory edge that it came on the blade and just get it as sharp as you can and just resharpen as needed. A little trick to help you make sure you're following this factory angled edge here is as you're either grinding or filing, it's going to be removing metal from the blade here, and you're going to be able to see that new shiny exposed metal. So you can actually use the factory line that's here as a good way to gauge it as you're creating your new edge. And if you start seeing it go down past this line, then that means you might have it angled up too much. If you're not even making it to this line, then you might have it angled down too much. So just keep an eye on that as you're going. Now, since this process to put a new edge on your blade involves removing metal, you want to make sure you don't get too crazy on one side compared to the other, because you want the weight to be as even as possible in order to keep the blade balanced. You can do this two different ways. Some people swear by one or the other, but you can either grind it going back and forth to create your edge, or you can do it by making individual single one-way passes. Now, if you're using a file, I think you do want to stick to the single individual one-way passes, but if you're using a grinder, it's kind of up to you which way you want to do. Some people even go as crazy as counting how many passes or how much they do on either side to try to help keep it as even as possible. If you did it right, your blade should be straight, flush, and all even metal. There shouldn't be any high spots, low spots, or any kind of bumps or anything in it. And if there is, you may want to go over it again. There's a few different methods you can use to sharpen your blades. One is just a regular bench grinder or a bench belt sander. Those are some options. Another one, you can just put your blade in a vise and you can just go old school. You take some files. They make more aggressive ones if you really need to take off more material, and then finishing ones and everything in between for finishing your edge. As far as this method goes, you basically follow the factory edge. This is a lot easier when you have a straight blade, but you kind of angle it to make sure you're getting it to grind the metal, and you basically just continue going until you have an edge that you're happy with. But the best method I found to do it is with an angle grinder here. But you want to make sure that you're using the best possible wheel on here, because they make quite a few different wheels. I'm not going to show the wire wheel because clearly that's not going to be the one that we're going to use. As far as This wheel, this is a cutting disc. You definitely don't want to be doing any kind of grinding or trying to do anything other than cutting with this. It's meant to cut through metal. It's not meant to do anything else. It could break and wouldn't be safe. So your other option would be just a regular grinding wheel here. But these are very aggressive. These will remove a lot of metal quick. I've seen people ruin their blades with these because they just take off a lot of metal. So it's definitely makes the job a little more difficult. The best way I found to do this is to use flap discs. Flap disc is basically a grinding wheel with sandpaper on it. And you can basically go over this and it's very forgiving. It's kind of like the best of both worlds. So you can go over it and it's not gonna take away a ton of material, especially for somebody new. It'll be more forgiving for a beginner. And that way you can just kind of try to match the edge the best, and it's gonna be based on also how much pressure you put on there. So the flap disc is by far, in my opinion, the most forgiving and the best option to use. Another option I've heard of some people using is they get an attachment that goes on the drill here, and then they put it in a vise or hold it, and they run this like stone that's on this drill attachment that's supposed to create the perfect angle. I've heard of some people that have used it and they didn't really like it and they didn't think it made that great of an edge. Another option that I've heard of some people using, I think it's called the All American, I don't know, something blade company or something along those lines. But they have a jig that you mount an angle grinder to, and then you put, I don't know if it's a vise or the blade goes into the jig, but it creates supposedly the perfect angle for using an angle grinder. I don't know if it's all worth it, but this is the way that I do it. Now there's not much on here, but if you have any buildup on either side of your blade, it's always a good idea to grab a scraper and just scrape as much off as you can, and maybe a wire brush. Try to clean it up the best you can, and you can do that to all of your blades if you want. These are a little tougher because of the bend and contours in the blade. So I'll usually try to get that as good as I can, get that, and then I'll kind of also go over them all in one run. So these are a little trickier. The flat ones are a lot easier, just doing straight passes. Even when you're using different ones, it's gonna take forever. This is more of a finishing one. I kind of wanted to get some of the nicks and stuff out, but this one will do a lot better here, but it's kind of hard to really get in that angle with this. That's where the angle grinder comes in handy. Now there is this little spot here. I mean, I'm not worried about these little imperfections here and there just for my own house. As long as it cuts decent and looks good, I'll be all right with that. There are certain areas sometimes that need a little extra cleanup, and I find it's better to just grab it by the hand and just get it taken care of like that. That way you have a little more precise action on what you're doing. Now, as far as the back side of the blade goes, this is actually meant to remain flat. It's not like a knife where you want to have an edge on both sides. So your edge is only on the side that we just put the edge on. This stays flat, but there are some burrs and little things that you want to at least clean up. A lot of times you can get away just quickly hitting it with just a file, just trying to keep it as flat as possible. You could use the angle grinder though, as long as you're very quick, just to kind of get those burrs off. I actually think the file is a little bit better for the backside here. It's easier to stay flatter, and it's easier to just be precise enough just to get the little burrs off. You don't have to get too crazy. It's pretty much exactly what I want. Be nice if it was straight and cleaner, but it's nice and flat here. It doesn't look that great on camera, but this is pretty much where you want to be. Good edge here, flat edge there. Not razor sharp, but sharp enough to do what it's meant to do. Once you're done sharpening your blades, you're gonna wanna make sure they're balanced. Now, these blades clearly aren't the best candidates necessarily to be sharpened, but it works good for purposes of this video. So there's a few different ways you can balance your blades. You can go and buy, I'll link in the description, they have these little circle pyramid looking things that you basically put on a bench or flat surface and put your piece in and see if it balances. They also have another pretty cool idea, which I've heard of people doing, is they take the same thing on a flat surface, they take a 6-inch socket extension. They put it in the center, see if it balances, and if it doesn't balance and they have to kind of move it over off center to balance, then they know that side was heavier and the other side was lighter, so they kind of have to take a little more material off the heavier side to balance it. But what I do, and a lot of other people do, is they'll just put a nail in a piece of 2x4 or somewhere. I just take my pipe wrench off here, and I will let it sit there, get it even, and just kind of see where it balances out. Sometimes it will drop quite a bit, one side or the other, and then you know whichever side drops is heavier. So this one seems pretty balanced. Even if I kind of tap it, it kind of comes back to balance. So we know that's good. That's not really a scientific method, but it's enough to give you an idea. But after you know that your blade is balanced, then you know that you're good to throw it back on your mower. And that's how easy it is to sharpen your mower blades. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least helped you out. If it did, please share it with somebody else, like this video, and subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.